Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Venerable Sangye Khadro. Welcome, Venerables. Welcome. My name is Mary Megenberg. Just wanted to do a very quick introduction. My goal was, as spiritual program coordinator, was to invite fantastic teachers for our community. Meditation is one of the foundations of our practice. Therefore, as you can imagine, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Venerable Sangye Khadro. You may know her better as Kathleen McDonald, author of How to Meditate, Awakening the Kind Heart. Yet it's remarkable, even her publishing, editing, and translating skills have extended all the way to the basic program materials that we're using for Venerable George's class. Anyway, Venerable Sangye Khadro began studying Buddhism in 1973, became a nun in 1974. She began teaching per the requests of her teachers in 1979, completed the master's program. Her accomplishments have been fantastic, and I'm absolutely delighted. And also, big shout out to Sravasti Abbey, where she's currently residing. Thank you so much for helping to make these teachings possible.
Okay, so from my side, I was very happy that Thubten Norbuling, through Mary, invited me to do this course because I really love the topic, the Lam Rim. I've always found it extremely beneficial to hear about and think about and meditate on and talk about. So I love talking about it, and it's also very beneficial for other people as well. So for me, this is a privilege to have this opportunity to talk about the Lam Rim. And so just a brief introduction to the course. The plan is to have classes on Thursday mornings. That's in Pacific and Mountain Time in America. And the course will go from now until the middle of November, but it will be in 2-month blocks. So we'll have classes every Thursday for 2 months, and then we'll have a 1-month break, and then another 2 months, and another 1-month break, and so on. And I don't know all the people who are attending this course. I can see a few familiar faces and names. But some of you might be relatively new to Buddhism. If you are, maybe you could just raise your hand or wave if you're a beginner. Okay, I see a few hands. Well, that's good because I plan to, kind of start off slowly and try to explain as much as I can as we go along. And there'll be opportunities for you to ask questions as well. So that's helpful for me, when people ask questions, then that helps me to know where people are at and what needs to be explained more. So the classes are relatively short, 1 hour. So we won't have much time for meditation, maybe a little bit of time for meditation, but most of the class will be explanation. I'll be giving an explanation, and I have some slides as well, because I think it's helpful to have something to focus on rather than just my face and my voice. So if there's some words on the screen, that might be helpful for you to keep your focus and understand better what's going on. And and so in today's class, what I'm going to do is just give an overall introduction to the Lam Rim. Some of you may be unfamiliar with what it is, and even the term Lam Rim, what does that mean? And also I will introduce the specific Lam Rim book or text that we're going to be using. So that's the plan for today. And before we jump into that, let's just take a few minutes to settle down and get into as positive a state of mind as we can before we launch into this wonderful class. So make yourselves comfortable. If you're sitting, excuse me, if you're sitting cross-legged, have your legs crossed in whatever way is comfortable. If you're sitting in a chair or a sofa, try to keep your back straight. That's really helpful to keep the mind more clear and more focused, more attentive. So if you can, keep your back straight, but at the same time, let your body relax. So some of you may have been busy already this morning doing different things, and there might be some tension there in your body. So if there is any tension, see if you can relax, let it go, let it kind of melt and flow out of you and disappear into the earth below. So try to have your body as relaxed and free of tension as possible. Now become aware of your breathing. Our body is breathing all the time, but often we're not aware of that. It just happens. Pay attention to the breath. Be aware of how it's coming into your body and going out of your body. Don't try to control it or manipulate it in any way. That's not necessary. Your body knows how to breathe by itself. So just let go. Let the breath flow naturally. But just be aware of it, coming in and going out. This is actually a really helpful way to relax and settle down and be in the present, because our breath is happening in the present, right here, right now. So if there are any thoughts in your mind that are not related to the present moment, you might be thinking about something that you did or said earlier today, or thinking about plans you have for later today. Put those aside. You can always pick them up again later if you need to, but just for now, let them go, put them aside. Just be with your body, be with your breathing, flowing in and flowing out. Be in the present moment. And now let's take a few more minutes to generate a positive motivation for why we're here, why we're doing this class. Some of you may be familiar with the idea of bodhicitta, the aspiration to become a Buddha, fully enlightened, in order to benefit all other beings. If you're familiar with that and comfortable with that, you can bring that into your mind and think that you're here joining this class, listening in order to create the causes to become a Buddha, to benefit all beings. But if you're not familiar with that idea, you're still new to Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism in particular, then just try to bring into your mind whatever positive, altruistic feeling that you can. We all wish to benefit other people, do good, help the world. So bring that kind of thought, that kind of feeling into your mind, and let that be your reason, your motivation for joining this class. For example, you can think, I want to learn more about how I can be more helpful to others and to the world. So we'll see if we have time a bit later for a little bit more meditation. Otherwise, I'd like to start talking. Can you put up the slideshow? Okay, so this is the title of our course, Lam Rim, Study, Reflect, Meditate. So as we go along, we'll get some explanation of those terms, what they mean. So the next slide. So what is Lam Rim? This is a Tibetan term. The word Lam means path, and Rim has the sense of stages or gradual or sequential. So the term Lam Rim basically means the stages of the path to enlightenment. And path, that term comes up a lot in Buddhism. And a path in Buddhism is actually a mental state. It's a state of mind, a realization, okay? And this type of mind comes about as a result of putting in time and energy to learn and then think about and then meditate on the teachings. So through that process, one is able to gradually attain a path, a realization. And there isn't just one path, but there's actually many paths, many realizations that are attained as we progress towards enlightenment. So that helps explain the term stages. Okay, so the attainment of enlightenment is actually a gradual process that involves learning about the Buddhist teachings, thinking about them, discussing them with others in order to have a better understanding of them, and then meditating on them, meditating on what we understand to bring it deeper into our mind and make it part of our mind, make it an actual experience that changes our mind, changes our life, changes our being. So the attainment of enlightenment then is a gradual process of transformation mainly of our mind, but also our body and our speech. Our whole being gets changed, gets transformed. And enlightenment, the term enlightenment is a little tricky because there are different understandings of what enlightenment is. Not everyone who uses the word enlightenment is necessarily talking about the same thing. Some years ago, I came across this website by some students of this American man who was some kind of spiritual teacher, and they said that he was enlightened. But their definition or their explanation of enlightenment was, they said, Enlightenment is a state where you're always in samadhi, always in a state of meditation, and you have a good sense of humor. So I thought, okay. So that's their definition of enlightenment. But according to Buddhism, enlightenment is a lot more than that. So I'm just saying this as a kind of warning that if you come across this term enlightenment in different contexts or used by different people, don't assume everyone is using it in the same way. Even in Buddhism, this is true even in Buddhism, because within Buddhism, there are different schools of thought, and they will have somewhat different explanations of enlightenment or Buddhahood. So it's a little bit tricky, but just for now, according to Mahayana Buddhism, that's the type of Buddhism followed in the Tibetan tradition, we could say that enlightenment is a state of perfection. Actually, my name, the first part of my Tibetan name, Sangye, is the Tibetan term for Buddha. And the term itself gives some clues about enlightenment. Sang has the sense of purification, being pure or clear. So that refers to the fact that an enlightened being, a Buddha, is totally free of everything that's negative, everything that's a problem. So all suffering and all delusions, ignorance, all the obscurations that are present in the mind of an unenlightened being. So all of those have been cleared away. They're totally gone forever, such that they will never arise again. That's the meaning of sang. And then gye, the other part of the word, has a sense of increased or expanded. And that refers to all the positive qualities. So there's many good qualities in the mind, such as compassion and loving kindness and wisdom, patience, so on. There's many positive qualities. We have those positive qualities ourselves, but in our minds, those positive qualities are not fully developed. They're kind of limited. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they may be mixed with other things that aren't so pure. But in the mind of a Buddha, an enlightened being, those positive qualities are fully developed, fully expanded to the point where they're perfect, pure, and present all the time. So for example, compassion. So in the mind of a Buddha, an enlightened being, compassion is there all the time, every minute, every second, for every single living being. Nobody is left out from a Buddha's compassion. Okay, so that just gives you some idea of what it means to be enlightened. According to Mahayana Buddhism, all the negative qualities are fully cleared away, purified, and all the positive qualities, the good qualities, are fully developed, perfected. And the good news is, according to Buddhism, we all have the potential to attain enlightenment. This is something we can all do. We use the term Buddha nature to refer to this. We all have Buddha nature. We'll talk about this more later, but basically what that means is all of us can become enlightened. It's not just certain special people can do it, but most of us can't. Every living being, every being who has a mind, it's just the very nature of our mind that it can be transformed in this way, free of everything negative and problematic and fully developed in everything positive. But as I said, it's not something that happens all at once in one instant, but it's a gradual process. It's a process of gradually transforming the mind. And another term we could use is mind training. We're training our mind to develop the positive qualities and decrease the negative qualities. And that's really what the Lamrim is all about. It's showing us how to do this gradual transformation of our mind and achieve the various stages of the path to enlightenment. And this process of attaining enlightenment is something we have to do ourselves. It's not that the Buddha can do some magic trick and suddenly we're enlightened, or pour blessings into us and suddenly we're enlightened. So it's a gradual process. And basically the work that needs to be done can be summarized into three things, three kinds of practices, which are in the title of this, this course. Listen. So we have to listen to teachings, and that can also include reading books and studying on our own. But acquiring the information, acquiring the knowledge of what is enlightenment and what is the path to enlightenment. The second step is reflecting, which means thinking about what we hear, trying to understand it. Because the Buddha said, it's very important that we don't just blindly believe what we hear or what we learn, but we check it out. We investigate it using our intelligence, using our discriminating wisdom. So we need to think about and come up with questions, ask questions, so that we have a better understanding of what we have learned. Then the third step is meditate. So meditate is, once we have learned about the path to enlightenment and we've thought about it, we have a good understanding of it, then we meditate in order to bring our understanding deeper into our mind, into our being, and bring about this transformation of ourselves. So during this course, we're going to mainly do the first one, listening and learning. We'll do a little bit of meditation, but I'll also be giving you some homework to do. I'll talk about that later. Reading homework, and also some reflection and meditation homework to do between classes, since we don't have a whole lot of time during the classes. So the second bullet point, this is another way of talking about Lam Rim. We can say it's a style of text or teaching that contains the main points of Buddha's teachings on how to become enlightened, arranged in a step-by-step way. So the origin of the Lam Rim is the Buddhist teachings, you know, what the Buddha taught. But the Buddha taught for like 45 years. That's a long time. So the teachings of the Buddha, if we put them all together, they're like a big stack of texts. Many of them haven't even been translated into English. But anyway, it would be difficult for one person to go through all those texts and understand them and make sense of them. So the masters who developed this tradition of the Lam Rim, they took the main points of the Buddha's teachings and arranged them in this gradual way, a step-by-step way that shows us how to get from where we are now as an unenlightened being to all the way to the stage of enlightenment, the state that the Buddha attained. And the very first of this type of text, the first Lamrim text, this is the third bullet point, was composed by an Indian master by the name of Atisha, Dipankara Atisha. And that text is entitled A Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, Bodhipata Pratipa. There are translations of that in English. What happened? I don't know what happened.
Oh, you just,
Huh?
you
just
still
got-
actually still up on our.
Oh,
screen.
I don't know what happened. It disappeared.
There you are.
Oh, okay.
But you've lost your background, which is interesting.
I don't know what happened there.
So if you go to video settings, that might work.
choose
Yeah.
virtual background.
Okay.
It's a different one than before, isn't it?
I think that's the same one.
Okay, so something happened on my screen. Maybe it didn't happen on yours, but I lost the screen. Okay. Where was I? I was talking about the very first Lamrim text called A Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. And there are English translations of this book if you're really interested and you have time. I did make a list of further reading of Lamrim books, which should be on the materials page of Thubten Norbu Ling. So there are, references there if you do want to read more. So this text is translated into English. And Atisha was an Indian master. He was considered one of the greatest Buddhist masters of his time. And he was invited to Tibet by the king of Tibet, who was concerned about the situation of Buddhism in Tibet at that time. Buddhism had already been in Tibet for maybe 200 years by that time, but there was some confusion about what the Buddha's teachings were all about and how to practice them. There were some mistaken ideas, mistaken practices. So the king of Tibet was concerned about this, and he said, we need a really good Indian master to come in and clear this up. So Atisha went to Tibet and stayed there. I can't remember how many years, but the last years of his life, he stayed in Tibet. And that's where he composed this text, The Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. So that's back in the 11th century. And subsequent to that time, other Lamrim texts were composed by various Tibetan masters, such as Lama Tsong Khapa, who's the founder of the Gelug tradition, the tradition that we follow and the Dalai Lama follows. So Lama Tsong Khapa wrote several Lamrim texts. One is called the Lamrim Chenmo, the Great Exposition of the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment. That's also been translated into English. It's 3 volumes. It's very extensive, very detailed, maybe a bit hard to understand as well. It's somewhat scholarly, so it's not what I would recommend as your first Lamrim book. That's why I've chosen another one that's a little smaller and a little maybe easier to manage. So the Lamrim tradition is mainly found in the Gelug tradition, but you do find in the other traditions of Tibetan Buddhism similar kinds of texts. For example, in the Kagyu tradition, there's a text called the Jewel Ornament of Liberation by Gampopa, who was a disciple of Milarepa. And that's also translated into English, and it's a beautiful text. So that's similar. It has this kind of step-by-step process of how to get to enlightenment. And in the Sakya tradition, I'm not so familiar with that, but they have a tradition called the Lamdre, which is the path and result. So it also kind of explains a gradual process of attainment of enlightenment. And in the Nyingma tradition, there's a book called The Words of My Perfect Teacher by Patrul Rinpoche, also in English, and similar kind of format. Okay, so then that's a brief introduction to Lamrim. Next slide. Okay, so this is a question you probably will not find addressed in any Lamrim book, but it's something that I have been wondering about for many years, and I have some thoughts about it, and I've also come across some comments about it. Is Lamrim for beginners? So the first bullet point, I heard the Dalai Lama say this when he was giving some Lamrim teachings in India some years ago. He said that the Lamrim Chenmo is the text by Lama Tsong Khapa, which is probably the most extensive, the longest and most detailed version of Lamrim there is. the Dalai Lama said that text is actually a practice manual for those who have studied the great Indian treatises. And so this is what they do in the monasteries, at least mainly in the Gelug tradition, but I think also in the other traditions. The monks and nuns in the Gelug monasteries, sometimes they enter the monastery when they're little kids, 6 years old, sometimes later. But anyway, they spend between 15, 20, 25 years studying, and mainly what they're studying, they don't study the Lam Rim. They're studying the great Indian treatises. And these treatises or these texts explain Buddhist philosophy, such as, the different kinds of phenomena that exist, the different characteristics of phenomena, the mind. They do a lot of study about the mind and, different aspects of the mind. They learn logic and debate because, again, the Buddha said we have to investigate and check what we are learning and not just blindly believe it. So they spend 15, 20, 25 years studying these great Indian treatises, which really lay out the whole of Buddhist philosophy and the whole of the path to enlightenment, what we have to do to reach enlightenment. And so the Dalai Lama said, well, the Lam Rim, like this Lam Rim text, is actually a practice manual. So once you've done all those studies and you want to practice, you want to sit down on your cushion and actually practice and get to enlightenment, the Lam Rim tells you how to do that. So that shows it's not really for beginners. And also in the second bullet point, Geshe Lama Zopa, he was one of the main teachers of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. He lived in Wisconsin for many years and passed away a few years ago. A wonderful teacher. And there's a book about his life. I think it's called Like a Waking Dream. Really, really interesting book. And in his book, his biography, he said that he first heard teachings on the Lamrim after he had been studying in the monastery for 20 years. Yeah, so he didn't start off in his monastic education studying the Lamrim. And then the third point says the order of topics in the Lamrim texts and the way they're explained shows that they are intended for those with a good understanding of Buddhism and a strong wish to practice it. So this is my observation, okay? This is what I have come to after, 45 years or 46 years of learning and practicing and teaching in this tradition. So just to give an example of that, one of the first things that you usually encounter in the Lamrim text is what's called preliminary practices. Okay, so these are practices that involve visualization and recitation of various prayers and so forth, and they can be very extensive and very elaborate. And so they're telling you, if you want to meditate on the Lam Rim, you need to first do these preliminary practices. And they involve visualizing many, many figures from the Buddhist world of, the great masters of the past, and then many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and then deities from Tantra, and so on and so forth. And so you visualize these in the space in front of you, and then you engage in a number of prayers. And the prayers involve taking refuge and generating bodhicitta and so on and so forth. So if you're a beginner and you don't, you haven't even studied Buddhism yet, you're still trying to figure out what Buddhism is all about and if this is really what you want to do, and you're asked, do this visualization and recite all these prayers, you're naturally going to wonder, who are all those figures? And why do I have to visualize them? And what do these prayers mean? Take refuge? What does that mean, take refuge? And Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, what are they? So if you haven't even learned about those things, then, many people will engage in these practices, but without very much understanding. So that's just an example of what I'm talking about, that the Lamrim texts are really meant for people who have already learned about Buddhism, in particular Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, and they have a good understanding of it, and they want to practice it. Okay, they've already decided, this is what I want to do. I want to follow the path to enlightenment. Tell me what I have to do. Tell me how to do it. I'm going to jump in and do it. And another example of this third point here is one of the first topics that we meditate on in the Lamrim is what's called the precious human life, or the precious human rebirth. And there we encounter rebirth right off the bat, you know. Oh, this life that we have is just one of many. We've had many lives before. We will have many lives after this. So this life we have right now is very, very precious. So it's taught in a way that just kind of assumes everybody believes in rebirth, and everybody believes in other realms in which one could take rebirth. And if we're not careful, when this life ends, we may find ourselves in one of those other realms, which would be very unfortunate. So maybe for Tibetans, that's not a problem, but for many non-Tibetans, especially many Westerners, it's a problem. Many people don't believe in rebirth and maybe never heard of it, never heard of these other realms. So these are just some examples that to me indicate that the Lamrim is not really intended for beginners. But I'm not saying this to discourage you. If you are new to Buddhism, don't feel like, oh, I have to drop out of this course. It's not for me. Because many of us who are now long-term students did start off with the Lamrim. I think that when our lamas, like Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, for example, began teaching Westerners, I don't think there were any texts that were like Buddhism for Dummies, or, you know, the ABC of Buddhism. They didn't need texts like that in Tibet, because probably 99% of the people in Tibet were born into Buddhist families, into Buddhist communities. So they were familiar with Buddhist ideas right from the time they opened their eyes and started, you know, encountering the world. And so they picked up a lot of these ideas about karma and rebirth and refuge and so on and so forth. It was just part of their whole world. And so they probably didn't need text to explain the basics of Buddhism. But most of us who are not Tibetan, you know, we're not born into a Buddhist culture and Buddhist society. So we do need to start with basics. And what the Dalai Lama, who's had many years, many decades of experience encountering people from other parts of the world, like America and Australia and so on. And he has come to understand that we need a different approach in learning Buddhism. So his recommendation is to start with the Four Noble Truths. So let's just take a look at the Four Noble Truths. So the next slide. What happened to the words? Okay, doing one by one, that's fine. So probably many of you have heard about the Four Noble Truths. You may have studied the Four Noble Truths, so this isn't new to you. But it doesn't hurt to hear it again. It's actually, in one sense, it's simple because there's just four things. But in another sense, when we go into details and really look at and really think about these Four Noble Truths, it's actually very, very, very deep. So it doesn't hurt to hear about it again and again. So this is the very first thing that the Buddha taught after he became enlightened. And so in a way, it summarizes the whole of his teaching, the whole of his message. So we'll just do a quick look at these. The first is suffering, but the term suffering, that's the term that's usually used, but that can be somewhat problematic because our usual connotation of suffering is something really intense and horrible and heavy, like war, you know, what's going on in Myanmar right now, or in Syria, or COVID, you know, people unable to breathe, or people suffering from cancer and so on. So really horrible experiences. Whereas when the Buddha talked about suffering, the actual term he used is dukkha. And it has more of a sense of any kind of unpleasant or unsatisfactory experience that we may have. Yeah, so even feeling bored, feeling lonely, feeling a little bit hungry or cold or hot or tired. So any kind of physical or mental experience that we may have that isn't ideal, isn't wonderful, isn't great, but is unpleasant, unsatisfactory. So that's what's meant by suffering. And the point is, this is universal. This is a fact of life. Everybody has these kinds of experiences. So, you know, we're very familiar with the suffering of those who are, you know, economically deprived, those who are sick, those who are homeless, and so forth. But even those who are very wealthy, millionaires, billionaires, celebrities, people in positions of power, royalty, presidents and prime ministers and so on, everybody has some kind of suffering. Okay, so it's just part of our ordinary unenlightened situation. And the Buddha went on to explain the causes of suffering. And these are basically karma and delusions. Now we're going to get into these topics more later. I'm just giving a brief overview of them. Karma means action. And some of our actions are positive, beneficial, like when we help those who are in need. But some of our actions are unwise, harmful, destructive, like when we harm somebody, kill them, or lie to them, or cheat them, or hurt them with our words, and so on. So when we do unwise, unskillful, harmful actions, those cause suffering. That's one cause of suffering. And the other cause of suffering are delusions, which are sometimes called afflictive emotions. I just like the word delusion. It's kind of simple. These are mental states. And we have a lot of them. But the main ones are what are called the three poisonous states of mind. Greed, that's when we want more and more and more, never satisfied with what we have. Hatred, we know that one. Hatred, anger, aversion, that's a very painful state of mind. And then ignorance or confusion. And that's a complicated term. Sometimes it refers to not understanding the true nature of things, but in the context of the three poisons, it refers to ignorance about karma, not knowing about karma. Like, for example, according to Buddhism, killing another living being is negative karma. It causes suffering to the being that we killed, but also causes suffering to ourselves. We're creating the cause to experience suffering in the future. But many people don't know that. They don't realize that. And a lot of people go hunting and fishing thinking it's fine to do that, and those beings don't really suffer, and they enjoy doing it, and they get something to eat as well. So they see only benefits in hunting and fishing. They don't see the problems, the suffering that they're creating for themselves later on. So that's just an example of how ignorance about karma can be a cause of suffering. Some of the things we do are actually setting ourselves up for suffering and problems in the future, but often we're unaware of that. That's a problem. So anyway, there are causes of suffering, and these mainly lie within ourselves, within our minds. And the good news is, number 3, the cessation of suffering. So this means it's possible to stop suffering, to end the suffering, and end it once and for all. So it never comes back. That's the meaning of cessation. And this can also be called nirvana. You've heard of that term, liberation, freedom from suffering, freedom from the causes of suffering. So this is a possibility. that all of us have. All of us have the ability to attain this state. And the Buddha himself attained it, and then he taught how to do it. And that's the fourth noble truth, the path that will bring us to that point of cessation. And one way of explaining the path is in terms of three things. These will be talked about more later. These are called the three higher trainings. Ethics, which mainly has to do with our behavior, how we behave, how we act. And then concentration, learning to keep our mind focused, single-pointedly, not wandering all over the place. And wisdom. Wisdom means understanding the true nature of things, how things really exist. So I'm just going through these really quickly. We will get into them more later, but if you have the time and the energy there's lots of books about the Four Noble Truths, lots of online materials, so you can look into these more. And but just to give an overview, this is what Buddha's teachings are really all about, is how to be free of suffering. And then in the Lam Rim, on top of just freeing ourselves from suffering, we also learn how to help others be free of suffering. That's the real goal, is sharing our knowledge and our experience with others so we can help all living beings find freedom from suffering and reach the state of perfection, enlightenment. So now, just for an overview of the Lam Rim, next slide. So the Lam Rim is quite vast. There's a lot of material in it. But this is one way of understanding in a brief way, as an overview, because the Lam Rim is explaining the path to enlightenment. It's like a journey, making a journey. And if we are making a journey, let's say you want to go to Dharamsala. And if you're in Santa Fe, some of you might be in Santa Fe. So if you want to get from Santa Fe to Dharamsala, your journey will involve several stages. Right? I don't think there's any direct flight from Santa Fe to Dharamsala. So you'll have to go through a few other places, maybe Los Angeles first, and then maybe Bangkok, and then Delhi. And then from Delhi, you have to find a way to get to Dharamsala. Okay, so before going on this journey, it's helpful to know what it involves. What is your itinerary? You know, the different places that you have to pass through, and then what you do in those places. Are you going to change planes? Are you going to stay on the same plane? Are you going to have to stay overnight in a hotel? So just to have an idea of where you're going to be going in your journey from here to your destination. Okay, so this kind of journey is somewhat similar to the path to enlightenment. And so this three scopes tells us the kind of stages that we're going to be going through on our journey to enlightenment. And different translators use different terms for this. Some talk about Lama Zopa Rinpoche uses the term capable beings, the three capable beings. Others talk about levels of intention, motivation, and so on. I just like the term scope, and that's the term used in the book that we're going to be going through. So scope is nice in a way because these three stages do have to do with one's vision, how one understands where you're at, where you want to get to. And, you know, as time goes on, your vision, your scope expands more and more. So the first of these is called a small scope. And essentially we can say what this involves is learning how to be more happy and less miserable, both now in this life and in the next life. Yeah, so here, this is another example of how the Lam Rim is really meant for people who kind of know about Buddhism and are familiar with ideas of rebirth and future lives and so on. So the traditional way of explaining the small scope is getting ready for the next life, you know, how to live this life to make sure that in our next life, we'll meet with fortunate circumstances and not be born in some unfortunate situation. But even if you have some doubt about rebirth, maybe some of you do, we'll talk about that more later and I'll try to help you with that. But the teachings in the small scope give us a lot of information about how to make this life better, how to have greater happiness, how to live our life in a way that we make ourselves happier, we make others happier, we have less suffering in our mind, and we don't make others suffer so much as well. So it definitely benefits us in this life as well. And included in this scope are topics like the precious human life, impermanence and death, refuge and karma. So these are coming attractions. This is what's coming soon as we go through the Lamrim. And then the middle scope is all about how to be free of suffering and get to nirvana. Because even if we have a good rebirth in our next life, it's still another rebirth. We're still going to have suffering and problems, and we're still going to have to die and then take rebirth again. And so a bigger goal than just a good rebirth next time is getting out of this whole cycle of death and rebirth, which is called samsara, or cyclic existence. So liberating oneself from the whole situation of samsara and getting to nirvana. So this is where the topic of the Four Noble Truths is explained. So again, coming attractions, we'll get into that more. And then the third one, the great scope, is expanding our mind even more and realizing I'm not the only one who's in samsara and suffering. There's lots of other beings around me as well. And they want to be happy just like me, and they want to be free of suffering just like me, and I want to help them. And how do I do that? Well, the answer is become a Buddha, become fully enlightened. Because as a Buddha, you will be able to help others. You have incredible knowledge and skills and abilities with which you can help other beings be free of suffering and help them reach enlightenment. So in that section, that's where we learn about bodhicitta, the aspiration for enlightenment, how to develop that state of mind, and the 6 perfections. Those are the main practices for the attainment of enlightenment. So these are all just coming attractions. I hope you're getting excited. Okay, we're running out of time, so I got to hurry. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so there's many Lamrim books, Lamrim texts, and some are very long. And if you wanted to study those, it could take years. We have a limited amount of time. So I chose this text, which is called The Easy Path, or Dalam is the Tibetan term, Dalam. And La means path, and Day can mean happiness or bliss, or here it's translated as easy or well-being. So there's actually different translators use different terms to translate this. But anyway, Dalam is the Tibetan, if you know anything about Tibetan. So this particular text was composed by the first Panchen Lama, whose name was Losang Chukyi Gyaltsen. And he lived in the 16th, 17th centuries. And he was the tutor of 2 of the Dalai Lamas, the 4th Dalai Lama and the 5th Dalai Lama. 5th Dalai Lama is often called the Great Fifth. He was one of the greatest beings in Tibet. And this first Panchen Lama has also written several other texts that you might be familiar with. One is the Guru Puja, which if you attend centers in the Gelugpa tradition, Buddhist centers, Buddhist monasteries, and so on, we regularly do this practice of the Guru Puja or Lama Chopa. So he's the author of that one. And he also wrote a text on Mahamudra, which is called the Geluk Kargyut Tradition of Mahamudra, translated by Alex Berzin. Anyway, that's just a little bit about the author. And there is a translation of this text, the root text, by Joshua Cutler, and it's available on the materials page of Thubten Norbuling for this course. So Joshua kindly gave us permission to use his translation, but he said it's an old translation. He did it in 1989, and he hasn't had the time to work on it further. But there is a book called The Easy Path, which looks like this. And this book contains an updated translation of Joshua's translation, plus commentary by Gyume Khenser Losang Jampa. So this Lama, he's alive. He's in his 80s now, living somewhere in San Jose, I think, California. He was living on the East Coast and teaching in New York and Connecticut and Washington, D.C., Grace Samaja Center in Washington, D.C. That's where he gave these teachings. And Lauren Ladner, director, I think he's the director of Grace Samaja Center, worked on the teachings, edited them, and so on, and made them into this book. So I'm recommending that you get a copy of this book. Because it's really wonderful. It contains the root text plus this contemporary commentary. And there's one other book as well. There should be another bullet point. Yeah. So there's also this book, which is called Path to Bliss, published by Snow Lion. This contains commentary given by the Dalai Lama in 1988. So this is also very interesting, but it doesn't have the root text. So you're welcome to get both books, but if you can't get both, then I think it's better to get the first one, The Easy Path. There's also a Kindle version available. And if any of you have trouble financially, not able to get the book, then send me a message. We have some friends in wisdom that might help out with that. Okay, so the last slide is homework. So I put this together the other day, and then I realized, well, maybe not everybody has the book, Easy Path, and they may not be able to get it before next week. So don't worry, just, if you do have the book, or if you're able to get the book, then these are the pages I would like you to read. This is part of the introduction of the book. And next week, I'll talk about some of the main points from those pages. So even if you don't have a chance to read before next week, then you'll get the most important points. And also, if you're new to meditation, because the kind of meditation that's used for the Lamrim is called analytical meditation. And some of you might be unfamiliar with analytical meditation. So in my book, How to Meditate, there is an explanation of two kinds of meditation, stabilizing and analytical. And so I extracted that and I made a file of that, and I haven't sent it yet, I think, but I will send it. So that will be on the materials page soon. So you can download that and read that. And if you do have the book, How to Meditate, you might want to review the first couple of chapters that do explain the basics of meditation. And then there's a meditation component for the homework, just to contemplate. It doesn't have to be, single-pointed meditation, but just to think about the Four Noble Truths. And I'd like you to do that at least 3 times before the next class, and spend at least 10 minutes each time. And I will send a sheet you know, kind of giving an outline of how you could meditate on the Four Noble Truths. So that will be again on the materials page. So that's it for today. And I think we've probably run out of time. Do we have any time left? Yeah, it's 9:30. So again, questions, if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat box or you can email them to Thubten Norbuling SPC, and they will forward them to me, and then I will look at the questions and give answers in the next class. Okay, so in the chat box now you have the email address where you can send your questions. I don't see any questions now. Anyway, I've probably been talking too much. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed with information. Sorry about that. Okay, so traditionally when we have Buddhist classes and meditations and so on, we start off at the beginning with a positive motivation. You know, why am I doing this? And at the end, we do a dedication to dedicate the positive energy that we've created during this period of time. So let's just take a few moments to do that. So we've just spent the last hour learning more about the Lam Rim, the path to enlightenment, really precious teachings of the Buddha on how to transform ourselves, become happier, become better able to help others. So we're really fortunate that we have this opportunity. So let's dedicate the positive energy that we've created by listening to these teachings and whatever positive thoughts or aspirations we may have generated in our mind during this time. Let's dedicate this just as we motivated at the beginning, that it will be beneficial, not only for ourselves, but also for others and for the world. May it bring about greater peace, happiness, and freedom from suffering. Okay, so thank you for joining.
Thank you, Venerable Sangye Khadro. Thank you so much.